All right, every year, right? We get into the costumes, the candy, the whole deal. But have you ever stopped to think about where Halloween actually comes from? The real story? Well, it's kind of like a 2,000-year-old recipe. It's this wild mix of ancient rituals, some clever religious moves, and a whole lot of modern marketing. So today, let's break that recipe down ingredient by ingredient. Okay, to get a sense of just how massive this thing has become, let's just start with a number. $10 billion. That's what people in the US alone spend on Halloween every single year. Yeah, billion with a B. And think about it. It's not even an official day off, right? That is an absolutely staggering amount of money. So that leads to the big question, doesn't it? How in the world did we get here? How did this ancient, really spiritual night morph into this global, billion-dollar spectacle of spooky fun? Well, the answer isn't some straight line from point A to point B. Nope, it's much more like a recipe. One that's been tweaked and added to for, about 2,000 years.
And to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to think like a folk historian. Now, folk history isn't about pinpointing one single aha origin moment. It's all about seeing how different cultural ingredients, ideas, traditions, feelings, get stirred together over centuries to create something totally new. It's less about the source code and more about the echoes that carry through time.
Okay, so let's get cooking. The base of our recipe, the very foundation, is this ancient Celtic festival. This is where that spooky, supernatural flavor that we all associate with Halloween, this is where it really comes from. And that festival was called Samhain. We're talking over 2,000 years ago. For the Celts, this was a huge deal. It marked the end of summer, the end of the harvest, but here's the kicker. They believed that on the night of October 31st, the veil between our world and the spirit world got super thin, like porous. And that meant ghosts, fairies, all sorts of otherworldly beings could just wander out on over.
But listen, Samhain was way more than just a spooky ghost story. It was a massive cultural event. I mean, yes, it was deeply spiritual, but it was also a harvest festival with these huge feasts. It was political. You had kings getting together, people paying their taxes, and it was a time for big celebrations, a little bit of mischief, and yeah, wearing costumes, usually animal skins to either blend in with the spirits or, scare them off.
All right, so we've got our base. It's ancient, it's earthy, it's a little spooky. But the next ingredient we're going to add, this one's a game changer. The Catholic Church steps in and adds this powerful new layer that's going to give the holiday its name and some of its most famous traditions. And what's so fascinating here is how strategically these Christian holidays were placed. Check this out. In the 8th century, the Pope moves All Saints' Day, a day for honoring martyrs, to November 1st, smack dab on top of Samhain. A little later, November 2nd gets designated All Souls' Day, a time to pray for the dead. So now you have this 3-day thing going on, and the night before All Saints' Day, that was known as All Hallows' Eve. You can probably see where this is going. All Hallows' Eve, Halloween.
So this layering of traditions, it creates something brand new. In medieval Europe, you start to see this practice called souling. Basically, poor folks would go door to door, and in exchange for these little pastries called soul cakes, they'd promise to pray for a family's dead relatives. Going door to door, asking for treats. Sound a little familiar? Yep, this is the direct ancestor of our modern trick-or-treating.
Okay, now we've got to talk about the ingredient that gives this whole recipe its distinctly American flavor. Because when all these old world traditions crossed the Atlantic, they got tossed into the great American melting pot and were fundamentally remixed into something you couldn't find anywhere else. See, early colonial America was super Protestant and pretty anti-Catholic. So when these traditions started showing up, they got stripped of all their religious bits. All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, all that was out. So what was left? Well, you had a secular harvest festival, a time for parties, celebrating the autumn crops, and yeah, telling a few ghost stories, but without any of the church stuff. But then, fast forward to the 1800s, a huge wave of Irish and Scottish immigrants comes over, and they bring their cultural memories of Samhain right along with them, and they basically re-inject that American harvest festival with all the old world stuff. The mischief, the folklore, the pranks. This is really when Halloween starts to get its reputation as a night for tricks.
And if you want the perfect example of how this worked, just look at the jack-o'-lantern. The whole tradition comes from this Irish myth about a guy named Stingy Jack. So to ward off wandering spirits, like Jack, people back in Ireland would carve these spooky faces into turnips. Yeah, turnips, and stick a hot coal inside. But when they got to America, they found something way bigger and way easier to carve. The pumpkin. It's a perfect case of an old tradition finding a new, and, let's be honest, better home.
So, let's recap our recipe so far. We've got the ancient Celtic base, the religious layer, and the all-American remix. But for that final glossy glaze, the thing that really makes Halloween what we know today, we've got to turn to Hollywood and modern consumer culture. It all starts to ramp up in the late 1800s. You've got Victorian Gothic literature giving us iconic monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. Then, of course, Hollywood grabs those characters and puts them on the big screen, creating this shared visual language for what's scary. After World War II, you see the rise of the suburbs and a booming middle class, and suddenly Halloween becomes this super kid-friendly neighborhood thing, all centered on safe trick-or-treating. And then, well, then you get iconic horror movies like 1978's Halloween, which pretty much cements the holiday's brand as the official night to get a good scare.
So there you have it. After 2,000 years of mixing and remixing, our cultural recipe for Halloween is pretty much complete. But wait, the story doesn't stop in America. Now this very unique dish is being served up and totally adapted all over the globe.
And this is what's so cool. You can see how other cultures take this American recipe and just add their own local spice. Like in Mexico, you see American Halloween traditions starting to blend with the beautiful and deeply traditional Dia de los Muertos. And then you go to a place like Japan, where it's become this huge youth-driven phenomenon, basically an awesome excuse for massive street costume parties, totally disconnected from any of the old spiritual meanings.
So let's just run through that full recipe one more time. You start with that ancient Celtic base. You add a layer of Catholic holy days. Then it gets remixed into an American secular harvest tradition. Stir in a big dose of Irish immigrant folklore and mischief. And finally, you top it all off with that shiny glaze of Hollywood horror and 20th century consumerism.
So, that brings us all the way back to the beginning, right? But now we have a totally new perspective. After seeing all those ingredients that went into the mix, what is Halloween really? Is it a pagan ritual, a Catholic holiday, a harvest festival, or is it just a Hollywood invention?
The answer? It's yes. It's all of those things, all at the same time. It is a perfect, living, breathing example of folk history, a tradition that's so much bigger and richer than the sum of its parts. And honestly, that beautiful, messy complexity, that's what makes it so amazing.